And welcome back to another chat in the Perspective series, or whatever crosses my radar, really. Um, and what I wanted to say a few words on was a talk I listened to just yesterday. And this particular talk was between Chris Martinson of the Peak Prosperity website and with Matthias Desmet, the clinical psychologist based in Belgium at the university there, who is well known or has been well known in recent months for talking about his ideas of mass formation. And he just published his book called The Psychology of Totalitarianism. Now, I've listened to Matthias Desmet speak on several occasions, and in fact, I wrote and an essay on his ideas and my thoughts around his ideas, which I published online in December of last year, 2021, called The Establishment of Mass Psychology and False Solidarity. And I'll put the link to that essay in the notes below for anyone who might be interested. So this is just, I think, a 30-40 minute talk with Matthias Desmet. And there's many I could point to, but I just wanted to say a few words on this particular one, because rather than talking about mass formation, because he's talked about mass formation, for the whole of the previous year, really. He just wanted to speak a few words on totalitarianism. And his summary was that totalitarianism is unique to the last 120 years, more or less the beginning of the 20th century. Before that, he said that was regimes of dictatorships. And dictatorships are different in that dictatorships usually you have a minority in power that control the masses through fear and through regimes of strict order and the establishment of force. And so in dictatorship, usually the people obey through fear of the consequences. But what Professor Desmet says is that during the beginning of the 20th century, we had totalitarianism, which is different because here, instead of forcing control over the masses, you use certain means, such as propaganda, social cultural programming, to get the masses to willingly adhere to the agenda, which is basically an ideology. So rather than using brute force to get people to follow your way, you create forms of programming and propaganda based around an ideology that gets the masses to support that ideology. And if you can hear anything in the background, that's my dog licking his water. So, and he gives the first example in Russia with Stalin and the Russian Revolution, which Professor Desmet calls the kind of ideology of kind of historical materialism, whereby the Marxist communist ideology was this socio-political materialistic ideology, and that of course spread outside of Russia to other countries, and in some cases is still lingering on in various forms. And without going into depth, there was a huge amount of death and suffering involved in that Russian Revolution to enforce that ideology. And the second one, of course, the one which is most infamous, is that came through National Socialism, the Nazi Party in Germany in the Second World War. That's been perhaps most probed and examined. And Professor Desmet referred to that as a kind of ideology of racial hierarchy, with all its implications. And we know that, of course, the German populists, a great amount of them, not all of them, of course, but a great amount of them were herded into this ideology. And historians and people have asked themselves since, how could it be that so many people went along with this when so much atrocities were involved? It could never happen to us. Famous last words. What's happening now, Desmet refers to as a new type of totalitarianism, one based on an ideology of technocracy, which involves technocracy. We've kind of touched upon it before. Involves a small ruling elite group controlling the masses through not only the technological apparatus, but also forms of kind of control through the ecosystem of everything being digital and datafied, and also so using data, using the technological architecture, and having everything monitored and controlled, and it's a kind of technologized bureaucracy. Now, the interesting point I want you to kind of focus on through all of that is that Professor Desmet singled out that the one thing which is common to these forms of totalitarianism is the notion or the concept or the driving concept of mechanicalness. That all these ideologies are based in a kind of machinic concept of life and the world as a mechanism. Coming off the back of this kind of clockwork universe mentality which came out of the so-called scientific revolution and on the back end of enlightenment. And so it placed everything as not in terms of a metaphysical understanding that I've talked about before, but life as mechanical. And since it's mechanical, it can be ordered and put in its place. And transhumanism is what I've referred to as the material fallacy. And I talk a lot more in a new book I've written, which is called The Inversion, but it won't be published until autumn of 2023 because of the publisher. But this is what I talk about as the machinic impulse. And we have a fallacy believing that materialism, because it's digital, isn't materialism. The metaverse and all that is not a material concept because it's digital. But that's just a fallacy. In fact, it's deepening the immersion into materiality. It's just that the material forms are less solid. And quite ironically, it was Marx who had that famous phrase, all that is solid melts into air. So it's as if the new historical materialism is de-solidifying into a kind of liquid modernity, as the sociologist Zygmunt Bauman would call it. A liquid modernity which is now becoming a kind of etheric form of control. We don't see it, but it's still a very kind of material form of control. It's just not a solid materialism. It's a kind of dematerialized materiality, if that makes sense. So, but you see, transhumanism, although it's been sold to the populace as being this progressive sense of advancement, the new future, it's still a material paradigm. It doesn't take into the course of spirit or genuine consciousness. The transhumanists believe that machines and AI will gain consciousness again, that is the material paradigm of consciousness as a byproduct of materiality. Consciousness in the human is a byproduct of the brain. Consciousness in machines is a byproduct of the complexity of the working of the machine or AI. Whereas all life is a gift coming from consciousness. So even technocracy and so-called advanced transhumanism is a completely material paradigm. And so there's mechanicalness about it. And I think this is a trap, or this is a delusion, is that we're being sold the new understanding of the future and the technological utopia as something which is, the new human, the new future evolution of civilization. But in fact, it's just an extension of materiality. And if we ever wish to get, to a genuine sustainable future, we have to understand, acknowledge, and reciprocate the presence of spirit, in my understanding. So this is for me why transhumanism will not be a dominant future, because it's a material paradigm. It's just an extension of current material trends, and the future cannot be an extension. It cannot be a linear extension. We need a leap, a jump into a new understanding of spirit consciousness, and how spirit consciousness and material paradigm work together, or are pervasive together. So really, what I liked about Professor Desmet's brief talk is that he pointed out that the new totalitarianism, which is coming through technocracy, the medical establishment, the biosecurity, all the Great Reset, the Fourth Industrial Revolution, what this is actually is a dehumanizing of the human being. Not a re-energizing, not progress, but a further dehumanization of the human being, because it's increasing the entrapment of the material paradigm. And you can hear probably my little Yorkshire Terrier, Pampy, barking away there. So I'm going to leave him in. I'm not going to edit out my little Pampy. So really, that's what I wanted to say, and I feel that's a useful, for me, thing to kind of to consider, is that any sense of progress cannot be an extension of the material paradigm, and the totalitarianism ideology, which is increasing now through global society, is really a delusion of basically a technological salvation. And technological salvation has been an ancient mean for a long time. So I don't feel that using that as the vehicle, the vessel for human evolution, is a sustainable one. It's a dead end one. And so I would suggest that if you haven't come across Professor Matthias Desmet, then please have a look at that, and I will put in the link to the particular episode I watched yesterday below with Chris Martinson, although there are many other interviews you could see about the subject of mass formation and false solidarity. So before my Yorkshire Terrier barks anymore, I'll say adieu until next time.